From the Raiders 14. Pickett over the middle. Touchdown! George Pickens.
Pickett fires. He's got Freiermuth again on third down, and he stays on his feet. Down the sideline. Stiff arm at the 25, and finally brought down at the 12.
Pickett, flush, pressured, throws on the run. Caught by Harris for a touchdown! Oh, what a play! And the Steelers take the lead!
Okay, we are going to talk Pittsburgh Steelers football on the Our-Lads Football Network. Can't wait to do this. We haven't hooked up with a Pittsburgh insider for a couple years, so it's been hard finding one, and it looks like maybe we've been lucky to find somebody that not only covers the team, but is actually there on site covering the team at training camp at Latrobe, PA. Alan Saunders from SteelersNow.com. Alan, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's good to talk Pittsburgh Steelers football, at least with somebody that is there in the trenches with the team as a writer. Tell me a little bit about your background covering the team.
Yeah, I've been covering the team since about 2019. And then just last year, I started covering the Steelers exclusively. I had always got a little bit of everything. And now it's basically all Steelers all the time for me. Still get to talk a little Pirates. I like baseball, covered them before, and got my start in covering hockey a very long time ago. So I can kind of do it all, but it's all Steelers for me right now, and great to be here at St. Vincent, where I can't get in the trenches, but I can get pretty close.
Yeah.
It's a great place up here where you can stand right there on the sideline and watch these guys go to battle, and it's a good time.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Fans love it, and it's a great time of year. Let's talk about – I want to break down several things, first of all, and a little bit later on, I'm going to post some numbers as far as what Vegas thinks about the Steelers' chances this year, and maybe you can give you some predictions on some of these too. I'm gonna hit you with some questions there. We'll also maybe get some breakout performer candidates, maybe some rookie sleepers. So let's start on offense, because there really hasn't been any coaching changes going into the season, correct? And that's not a surprise for Mike Tomlin's staff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was a little bit surprising since they hadn't done great in 2 years under Matt Canada, but I just think they really wanted to keep things the same for Kenny Pickett, going into his second year and not put too much on his plate to deal with also having to change coordinators. The Steelers are in the same division as the Cleveland Browns. The Steelers have had 3 head coaches in 60 whatever years, and the Browns have had that many in like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I think they very starkly see the difference that continuity has gotten them. So they, like you said, they're a team that just really prioritizes that over necessarily, hey, we weren't where we want to be, so let's make a change. That's not necessarily their first thought always. So Matt Canada back for a third year, but I got to think there's some pressure under him in this offense to perform better this year than they did last year. And improvement from Kenny Pickett is certainly going to be the number one way they accomplish that.
Sounds good, because, last year, of course, we didn't get a chance to talk, but I have been, and especially going into his days in college, a Pickett fan. Thought he'd be an under-the-radar sleeper-type quarterback. Not that he, of course, first-round draft pick. It's kind of hard to be a sleeper, but not a lot of people really expected, I think, as much as Kenny gave the team last year. Obviously, there's a lot of room to grow. We know that. But he still looked pretty good for a rookie.
I'll see you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he looked good. I think the things that, really to me stood out were the arm strength, those big-time NFL throws. I think that was the thing that maybe if you just watched the film at Pitt, like, is this going to carry over? Can he push the ball down the field? Can he throw into tight windows? Does he have just a big enough arm to do it? And man, I thought he did that down the stretch. Now, it didn't turn into like big statistical production because they have a pretty conservative offense. He had some interceptions early in the first couple games he started, so I think they were trying to minimize the mistakes and keep things pretty basic. But I do think he just showed that he's got the arm to do this. And I think anyone that's been associated with Kenny Pickett at any level of football, like, there's always to me been a faith in the person, in the work ethic, the leadership. I just think he is. Like, if you build a quarterback in a factory from an off-the-field perspective purely, you would come up with Kenny Pickett. Could he be a couple inches taller? Could he throw the ball a little harder? Like, sure, but, man, he does everything you want your quarterback to do.
And you said the team a little bit conservative. Was that because of Pickett under center, or is that basically the offense with the running game that they're going to still rely on Najee Harris a lot? Or do you think they'll start opening it up a little bit more this season?
Well, I think it was a combination of a couple things. One is, look, they should have a really good defense. They had the number one payroll defense in the NFL last year. They have T.J. Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Alex Highsmith, Cam Hayward. Like, they should be able to rely on that defense to win them a lot of games. And then I think the second thing was last year, their offensive line was not very good. And I think that really increases two things. When your offensive line is very good, you get yourself more into bad down and distance circumstances. And, that's how you make splash plays for the defense is by beating that offensive line. You get the quarterback running around, then he throws an interception, or you hit him and the ball's out, or you're stopping the running back in the backfield. And so they really invested in their offensive line this offseason, got Broderick Jones, left tackle from Georgia in the first round, signed Isaac Seumalo in free agency. He'll be at left guard from the Philadelphia Eagles, really sort of solidifying the left side of that offensive line. I think will go a long way to giving them the confidence that they can be a more aggressive offense without having the negatives that they felt like would have come with that if they had done this last year. Then just another year of Kenny Pickett being familiar in the system. So I do think they're going to be more aggressive. They will have to win more on first down. I think Najee Harris should be able to do that. I don't think they're going to lean on him to the point that they need him to have 2,000 yards or something like that, but they need him to win enough on first down that they can get into second and short and third manageables and let Kenny Pickett take those risks down the field. And I think there will be a more explosive offense if they can do that.
So when you see Harris has an average of only 3.9 for his career in the first 2 years, do you attribute that then to the offensive line? That if the offensive line gives him some more holes, he should be more like a 4.4, 4.5 guy at minimum?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some give and take there, right? I mean, a great running back should be able to do better than that, even if the offensive line is not the best. I don't think I'm ready to call Najee Harris a great running back yet, but I think he can be better than he has been.
Okay.
And we saw it down the stretch last year. If you look at about the second half of last season, he was in that, I think, maybe like 4.2 or 4.3 range. I think that should be very easily accomplishable for him and his skill set in this offensive line going forward. I do think he can be better in terms of his vision and kind of knowing, what plays do you just need to take 3 or 4 yards at the, so you make sure you don't lose one, and where are the plays when you can try to break one long. We also haven't seen very much of those in general from him. He's not the most explosive guy. He's a bigger running back. He's a really good athlete. But when you're talking about yards per carry, 1 or 2 20-yard, 30-yard runs over the course of a season really makes a big difference. Yep. And we just have not seen those burst plays from him. So I think there's some more to give from a guy who was a first-round pick and pretty highly touted, but the offensive line being better will certainly make a big impact.
Do they have adequate depth behind Harris, or do you think that's something that they have to improve on?
I really love Jaylen Warren. I think he's I don't know how he was an undrafted guy. I don't know. Like, he's, everything that you say about undrafted young running backs, he's like the total opposite. He is such a good pass protector for not a very big guy. And I think when you can start there, it just gives everybody so much confidence and faith in that guy to give him more and more chances. And then he ran really well when he got those chances, but it all starts with he hurts people in pass protection. Like, pass protection is supposed to be a passive job. It is not a passive job for Jaylen Warren. He gets out there and he lays hits on people in the blocking game, and I think that ability as a rookie really is very rare, and that gave the coaches just so much confidence in him to let him play more, and everything they asked him to do, he never failed at a challenge. He maybe wore down the stretch a little bit, but, man, I think he's a really good change-of-pace backup guy for them. They don't really have much depth beyond those two guys. It wouldn't totally surprise me if they're active in the waiver wire game at that position.
Okay.
Maybe try to get a more experienced guy as like a number 3 type. But 1 and 2, I think they feel very solid about.
Yeah, I'm going to pop up the depth chart, the Oilers depth chart, as we go over some of these positions. And question: so Harris, his receptions went down considerably from his rookie season. Was that by design? Is that something that they don't want? I mean, 74 receptions—that's a lot. So do they want to limit the wear and tear of Harris? You think he's going to be more like a 41 guy like last year?
Yeah, I mean, I think he led the NFL in touches and snaps by running back in his rookie year. I just don't think they thought that was a sustainable pace. And when they looked at the other talent they had around him, you have this young running back in Jaylen Warren, who was a really good pass protector. And they really kind of made that like a first and second down, third down split last year. A lot more his rookie year. Harris played almost every down.
Yeah.
And so, I think it was just, I'm not sure they're necessarily going to throw the ball to him less, but he's going to be on the field less in obvious pass down situations. Again, I would expect more like last year's workload than his rookie year.
All right. At wide receiver, so Deontay Johnson, again, big numbers as far as targets. Yards were down a little bit, but the big number, of course, was 0 for touchdowns. I'm sure that was talked about. But here's a guy who had 20 touchdowns combined in his first 3 seasons. Of course, different quarterback situation. We get that. Pickens came in, favorite of Kenny Pickett, so we get that. And Freiermuth had his breakout, kind of first breakout. So what do you expect from the receiver unit? How do you think it's going to especially for fantasy fans out there, how do you think it's going to work out with Johnson, Pickens? They bring in Allen Robinson from the Rams, and then also Calvin Austin now. How's he been looking? He gets a chance after missing all of last year.
Yeah, I mean, I expect Deontay Johnson and George Pickens to kind of dominate the touches in terms of the receivers. I mean, they're both so good and so different. It's not like and really anything that they asked Pickens to do last year would be things that they would be asking Johnson to do. They're really very complementary of each other in terms of skill sets. Johnson's a guy who's always open, is an elite separator from coverage, especially on inward breaking routes and places in short areas. And Pickens is a guy who's always covered, but just throw to him anyway because he has elite combat catch skills and I called him an alien today. He does things that should not be possible in terms of going up and getting the ball in tight spaces. And so I think they're really complementary. I don't think it necessarily needs to be one or the other. I do think if you have an offense that doesn't get a lot of explosive plays and you're really just grinding out and all these like 10, 15, I think they had an 18-play drive last year. That means when you score, you're scoring from like the 2-yard line every time.
That's true.
And if I look at their weapons, if I'm at the 2-yard line, I think I'd rather throw it to Pickens or Freiermuth or have Najee Harris run it or have Kenny Pickett run it. Like, I think, when you have an offense that is just so step by step, I think by the end, maybe Deontay Johnson is not the best choice of those weapons.
Sure.
And so I'm not sure you're going to see the touchdowns come like way up. It will be more than one. I will feel very confident about saying that. But I think he needs to be one of those guys, though, that they get into some space and let him score some longer touchdowns. Let him run in between the hash marks. That was an area where I think they were very, very risk averse last year, where if they were going to throw an iffy pass, it was going to be outside. They threw almost nothing that wasn't a sure thing in between the numbers. If they can, get to the 30, 35-yard line and get Deontay Johnson with a head of steam, he can score some touchdowns from out there and not need to make this offense so step by step. And so I think there's some room for growth there. I'm not sure the touchdowns will come all the way back to where they were, but they'll be elevated. I'm pretty sure about that. I think the Vegas line right now is 4 or something like that. I kind of feel like he should be able to clear that, but we'll see. I mean, there's a long way to go.
Austin, how's he looking?
Austin is an interesting guy because he's so explosive. I think they're still trying to figure out exactly how they want to use him. There's been a couple of times where he's so fast, he gets behind guys in coverage, but he's also like 5'9", if I'm being generous. Like, he's a small guy. And so I think, you really got to hang one up there to kind of drop it into his breadbasket if he's going to be a deep ball guy. I think more of the places where he does fits sort of directly into their offenses. They run a lot of jet sweeps. I expect him to be the guy to get most of those this year. Get him onto some wide receiver screens and get, one of Matt Canada's core offensive principles is making the defense defend the entire width of the field. I expect them to use Calvin Austin to do a lot of that because he's so fast that, he's not a guy that is going to be super handicapped by starting out going sideways. As far as down the field, I think it's still just a bit of a work in progress. He's obviously able to get behind guys. I just think they're not quite sure exactly how to go about getting him the ball once he gets back there.
Okay. And again, there was a disparity in targets last year. What receiver 1 to receiver 2? Do you think that is going to come back to where you think Johnson and Pickett are almost going to be even, or do you still expect Johnson to be the main guy?
I think Johnson will get more targets just because the things he does are kind of, you're not going to throw 25, go route contested sideline passes a game. It's just easier to. I would imagine that you'll end up with Johnson with more catches and Pickens with about the same yards.
Okay.
Because he's going to have a much higher average. I think production-wise they'll probably end up about the same, but I'd expect Johnson just to get more targets. I also think Allen Robinson is going to be a really important player for them on third downs. He's such a smart, tough receiver. I love him against zone coverage and just gets into those little spaces. Another good contested catch guy. They don't need him to be the receiver that he was with the Bears and the receiver that the Rams kind of thought they were getting. He could just be that kind of third wheel possession down receiver and still be really effective for them. So he's going to take some of those more certainly than they got out of their slot receivers last year, especially after the Chase Claypool trade. But I really think that he'll be a guy that from like a fantasy perspective is probably going to take away from the guys that people are going to be more interested in.
Yeah.
But I think from a team standpoint, if he can be a guy that catches a lot of first downs, everybody gets more opportunities and then it kind of lifts everybody up.
And it's also, and even though he's been the one that's been banged up mostly, but let's say if there is an injury, a short-term injury to 1 or 2, Robinson can easily move up the depth chart. You have Austin now, so a little bit more depth this year. Now, what about the rest of the skill position talent as far as the depth and the players that will be fighting for that final playoff spot or two? Who should we be keeping an eye on for those final couple of spots at running back, tight end, and wide receiver?
Yeah, I think the tight ends are loaded. I mean, they really like this tight end group. They got 4 of them. I think they're going to keep all 4, and I think they're going to have 4 guys that get helmets and play every game. Obviously, Freiermuth is kind of the star player there, but Zach Gentry is a guy as a blocker that they really have a lot of faith in. And it also is he's huge. He's extremely tall. And even though he's not an elite athlete or a great route runner, he's always sort of available as like a dump off or a check down guy. And he has just this sort of knack for getting lost in defenses. I think they just assume he's going to block every play he's out there. He goes uncovered more than anyone of his speed ever should.
Yeah.
And then Connor Hayward really came on down the stretch as a young player in his rookie year. He's a very interesting athletic type that you don't really see very often. He started out in college as a running back, and then he made the move to tight end. The Steelers are going to kind of use him as like an H-back type, probably mostly not with his hand in the ground, but either as a wing-back tight end or a fullback or in motion or something like that.
Okay.
But he's a guy that has great hands, and he runs after the catch so well. Breaks tackles. If you get him moving in space in the secondary, he's hard to bring down. Not a guy that I think is going to get a ton of action, but a player they're going to want to have in there because he presents some matchup problems. He's also a core special teamer. And then you have Darnell Washington, who's a third-round pick. Allow me to say this. First rep with pads today, one-on-one, offense versus defense, and he stone-cold walled up T.J. Watt.
Wow.
Very first rep. I mean, he can block.
Oh,
and
yeah.
He's 6'8". Mitch Trubisky threw him a touchdown pass. I don't even think he left his feet. He just put his arms up, and they were taller than everybody else out there anyway. He's a guy that you can kind of look at and wish and hope on. I'm not sure he's going to make a big impact as a rookie outside of his blocking, but man, you get a guy that big that can move that well. I think you got to be able to find a way to use him in the passing game a little bit. but even if he's just a blocker, he's going to be a really good one. So, I mean, I'm kind of thinking we're probably not seeing a lot of these depth wide receivers guys making it. It's going to be a battle. Guys like Gunnar Olszewski and Miles Boykin, who have been special teamers for them and useful in those phases. Hakeem Butler coming off a big year in the XFL. He's another big guy. I think he's had some drops problems so far in training camp, so not super consistent. But, man, I mean, he's a huge guy and an awesome athlete. And Des Fitzpatrick out of Louisville, guy bounced around a little bit. He's been really impressive too. So they've got a tough cut there. I'm not sure that there's a sort of obvious candidate. But I think they're going to keep the 4 tight ends, probably 3 running backs. Anthony McFarland would be the one that we didn't mention that's on the roster. Like I said, there might be a place where they go find a veteran guy. And I think maybe only 5 wide receivers. It's going to be a tough cut there, but it's definitely a deep back end of the skill position group for them.
All right, and then the offensive line. You mentioned, of course, the big additions there, the rookie first rounder and Ciamalo from Philadelphia. So that really does solidify the offensive line if everything works out there. What are we looking at as far as do we have any competitions? I mean, is right guard is that or even right tackle? Do we have any competitions there?
Well, I think they're going to make Broderick Jones earn that job at left tackle. I mean, Dan Moore, who's been their starter for the last 2 years, has been working with the first team for the most part out here. But you know, they didn't draft a left tackle in the first round because they didn't feel like they needed a left tackle. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're looking to upgrade that spot, and they have a tough early part of the schedule when it comes to opposing pass rushers. They've got Nick Bosa, Myles Garrett, and Max Crosby. Weeks 1, 2, 3. And so I don't think they're necessarily in a big rush to get the young man in there. I think they might be okay if Dan Moore is the guy at the beginning of the season. They've got an early bye. So I think they're taking their time with that. He's also, Jones did not start. He only was a full year starter for 1 season at Georgia. So not the world's most seasoned guy coming into the league. Might have a bit of a learning curve, although he's looked really good so far. So that's kind of the one battle. And then the other thing is sort of what happens at guard. I wrote today, I think Kevin Dotson is kind of in a battle against himself. 3-year starter at guard. They signed Seumalo. James Daniels was rock solid for them at right guard last year. And then they added Nate Herbig, too. He could go from a starter to the 4th guy in the depth chart.
Yeah.
I think he's a guy they should be looking to trade. I don't know if they will be able to find something that they think is appropriate value to make that move. But, you know, he's a guy that has so much starting experience and is still so young. I think it's hard for me to see him sitting on the bench all season, maybe not getting any reps at all. Like, I think they might be able to find a willing taker for him and make a move there going outbound. But that's certainly something to watch. They don't have a solid number 2 center. Kendrick Green was a 3rd-round pick 2 years ago, has not been great. Didn't play at all last year. He's kind of in pencil there, but I'm not sure they're in love with that solution. So James Daniels has done it before. I guess he could. If there was a real long-term injury to Mason Cole, I assume he would slide over. But if they keep a second center, that position is kind of up for grabs. Spencer Anderson was a 7th-round pick. He has not gotten a lot of work there yet, but I assume at some point they're going to try him out at center and see how he does.
Okay, so right now, is there a penciled-in starter at right guard?
Yeah, James Daniels is starting at right guard.
He's starting at right guard, okay.
Yeah, and you got Chukwuekorfor back at right tackle. I think those guys are pretty solid.
Okay, and you're thinking Dotson is a potential trade candidate?
Yeah.
Okay. And why not? Like you said, there is some depth there now, so we'll see. But injuries happen. Not that we want to bring that word up. All right, let's take a look at the defense then. And I love the special effects in the background, by the way. Love it. Let's talk about this because there's some really big-time draft picks coming in on this side of the ball. Joey Porter, I mean, that had to be such a huge deal to the fans and the organization to bring him in. Let's start in the secondary because there are some changes back there. Not just, of course, Porter coming in, but you got the veteran Peterson coming in. I mean, what is it? You see, Maulet's gone, Witherspoon's gone, Sutton's gone, Jackson's gone, Sullivan's in. Porter's in, Peterson's in, and even Trice is in. So there's a lot of movement there.
Yeah, the secondary kind of got jumbled up a good bit. You know, the one stationary piece is Minkah Fitzpatrick, and that's a pretty good starting point. Although he has not been practicing at the start of training camp. Mike Tomlin said it's personal reasons. I don't know what's going on there, but I expect him to be in the lineup week one. I think to me the big unsettling piece is they lose Terrell Edmonds, and they're going to try to replace him with a combination of guys, DeMonte KZ and Keanu Neal, with KZ kind of playing more when they want to do that too high look, where you kind of have two evenly spaced safeties, and Neal probably playing more when they want to go down in the box. Edmonds was a first-round pick and a guy that I think the Steelers had high hopes for, and I don't think he was very popular with the fan base here because you'd see a lot of highlights with 34 chasing the guy scoring the touchdown.
Yeah.
But I just think they kind of have come to the realization that what they were asking him to do was not really possible for most guys.
Okay.
And that they really needed to split that position into two guys at least. And maybe it's going to be three. So I think we're seeing how that's going to play out. It's still pretty early to kind of have a feel for maybe how the snaps are going to be distributed there. We're going to see KZ a lot. We're going to see Neal a lot. Neal's also played some linebacker. They did just sign Quan Alexander, so they do kind of have a coverage guy there. But if they need some coverage help at linebacker, he can do that too. And then a corner, what I expect is that Patrick Peterson will fully replace Cam Sutton. And what I mean by that is Cam Sutton started as the boundary corner in the base defense and then moved inside as the slot corner in the nickel and the dime. He's talked about wanting to do that. I think the one piece that has prevented the Steelers from just coming out and screaming that that's what they're going to do is they're not sure how fast Joey Porter Jr., the second-round pick, is going to come along. If he is ready day one to be a starting outside corner, then I think that will be the plan. Otherwise, I think you're going to see Shandon Sullivan in that slot role a good bit. And they have a couple other guys, Elijah Riley, Trey Norwood, that have done that before that they like and have faith in, but are not necessarily high pedigree guys in terms of coverage ability. And so I think there's a plan in place that's sort of starting to take shape in terms of the secondary. But until we see it all on the field, I'm not sure exactly how things are going to play out in terms of rep distribution and things like that.
Are they satisfied with Wallace?
Yeah, I think they're really happy with Wallace as a solid number two. I will say he is the one starter whose contract is up at the end of this season. And Omar Khan said in his pre-training camp press conference, we're not negotiating with anybody else right now. We're kind of done on extensions. So, I guess that means they're not so set on Levi Wallace that they want him here for 2024. But he seems to be the kind of guy that they're happy with, at least for now, taking that number two spot.
And by the way, James Pierre, that's a nice story, being a college free agent. You see him every year. I'll probably ask you to give me one this year from the team. But, he seems like he's been a nice addition, as a role player. Is he more a special teams guy? What is his role?
It's interesting because he is a guy that he's a good special teamer. He's a great, probably their best kickoff coverage guy in terms of defensive back body types. And he's done a lot of that. But he's also a guy that every year it seems like he ends the year better than he starts it. He started out as a rookie with almost no expectations, and by the end of it, he was this kind of core special teamer and getting some good reps in the defense. And then at the start of his second year, it seemed like he had taken this step back, and no one was quite sure what was going on. And then there were some injuries, and he got back into it. And so I don't know. He's a guy that's a little bit hard to figure out. Obviously, when you look at him physically, he's big, strong, tough, fast. There's nothing really not to like. And so I think it's mostly just about consistency with him. If he can be more consistent, I think he could be a guy that they could like. If they want to go to a dime look and bring in an extra corner, they certainly like him as a special teamer. And, I think maybe people have undersold how good Patrick Peterson is right now, because when you make a free agent signing and it says he's going to be 35 this year, I think people kind of like, oh, well, yeah, that guy is just whatever. He's just there. Yeah. He was really good last year.
Yep.
I think he probably should have been a Pro Bowler last year. And so I think he's going to have a big impact on this team, but he is 35 years old. And so if you're looking at a guy that could be an injury replacement, a stalwart, Pierre is certainly that. Corey Trice, 7th-round pick. Steal, I think. He looks great. However, went down with an injury today in practice. So looked pretty bad. Don't have any details yet, but looks like he will not be healthy to start the season. I would say pretty certainly. Maybe more than that, we shall see. But I think long term, he's a guy they really think can be. You know, when you draft a guy in the 7th round, you're like, oh, I hope he makes the team. I think they have big plans for him going forward.
Okay. Linebacker, and same thing. I mean, as far as a whole new group
all
inside. New. Yeah. Wow. Amazing. I mean, we're not going to talk about the guys that aren't there. You mentioned Alexander's in there, but Holcomb and Roberts, are they going to be the top guys? And you mentioned, and of course, Herbig comes in as a 4th rounder.
Yeah, I think Holcomb is going to be kind of the guy in terms of like if they have a 3-down linebacker, he's it. I'm not necessarily sure that he is like as good enough in coverage to really be a great 3-down linebacker, but I think he's just a smart enough player. And even though he's not super like lightning fast, he can get the job done. And I think he's going to be the green dot guy for the defense. I expect him to be kind of the guy that gets the most of the reps there. Landon Roberts. I didn't have like a strong opinion about him when they got him. I've been really impressed by his work ethic. He's an older guy. He comes in and he hits as hard as I can remember a linebacker hitting in terms of like guys that are on your own team that you're supposed to shake hands with afterwards. Yeah. He's a violent guy, especially against the run. Not limited as an athlete, not a guy that's going to run down the field in coverage for you. But, I think it's one of the very interesting things about the Steelers is they kind of have this reputation of being this old school philosophy team that kind of runs backwards to the league in a lot of ways. But also, they're in a division with the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens. Those two teams want to run the ball 100 times a game. So, like, they kind of have to be backwards sometimes. They need to be able to go to war in the trenches with some of these teams that have these very conservative offenses. They play the Raiders this year. They play the Titans this year. Like they're going to have a ton of carries against. And so the ability to go to a guy like Landon Roberts, who's just a classic thumper of a linebacker, I think will make them deeper and keep them fresher at the end of games. Those are the games that really wear down guys, especially if they're smaller guys.
Yep.
That's one of the reasons I think Devin Bush didn't really work out for them. It's just the ability to be physical on a play-after-play basis over the course of the season. And so I think they feel good about that. Quan Alexander obviously brings some coverage. He can hit too, though.
Oh, yeah. Very physical.
Yeah, he's a – and so I think that's a pretty solid 3. Mark Robinson was a late-round pick last year, a guy they really like and have some hope for. He'll probably play a lot of special teams, but converted college running back, so just totally new to what he's doing, but he runs around and hits people hard. And if you're a linebacker, that's a good sign.
And anything out of Herbig yet?
So Herbig has been playing on the edge, all outside linebacker. I, coming into this process, was like, I don't see it. I'm a little skeptical. I looked at the measurables. It just didn't add up to me. And then I saw his pass rush moves, and now it's starting to make sense. This is a guy that has an extremely advanced pass rush skill set for a young guy coming out of the Big Ten. And I don't know if he's ever going to be the kind of outside linebacker that can stand up to that run game attrition like we're talking about just because of his size. But if you need a situational pass rusher at that position, I think he can be that. And I think that's exactly where they're steering him, at least for his rookie year.
And then on the defensive line, and really the edge as well. Of course, Highsmith had the breakout year last year. They're set with Watt and with Highsmith. That's huge. We know that, especially Watt, who's banged up a little bit. But I continuously tell people, because we do a lot of handicapping on the channel, and anytime we talk about the Steelers, I say, you know what? If there's one player that's not a quarterback in this league that I believe is worth the same amount of points you take off the board if the quarterback isn't there, it's T.J. Watt. Yeah. In other words, if you're going to take 3 points off the board because you're going from the first string to the second string, you should be taking 3 points off the board if T.J. Watt doesn't play.
I think that has been the case. It certainly was the case last year. I do think they feel really good about getting Marcus Golden in that third edge rusher spot this year. They've really been trying to add to the depth in the front. I really think Andy Weidl, the assistant general manager, came over before last season from the Philadelphia Eagles. And if you look at that Eagles front, the way they kind of attack in waves, they had this whole second unit that, as good as some teams' first unit, the first round pick couldn't even start. and he's an awesome player out of Georgia. And so I think that's kind of the thing they've had in mind. And then things kept happening that, they got Melvin Ingram, and then he wasn't happy being a third wheel. And then TJ got hurt last year, and the whole thing, fell apart. I think they feel really good about Marcus Golden in that spot, that they can be deep and obviously very talented at the top in terms of edge rusher. And they've got some depth coming on the interior of the line too.
Yeah, speaking of the line, so Hayward, still just an amazing player. 20 and a half sacks over the last 2 years. And that's not, 14 and 6. That's 10 and a half. So that just shows you that he's still the man. How else, Benton, that's going to be a big part of the future of this line, isn't that player? Because I mean, what I saw out of college, and it looks like Pittsburgh likes these Wisconsin players, and why not? But Benton certainly looks like the type of player that could be a high upside, especially with Hayward probably only hanging around another few years. Maybe he's the future of the line.
Yeah, well, Jim Leonard's defense is basically the Steelers' defense. And so what you've seen from those Wisconsin players, what the Steelers see is they can draft players where they don't need to make a guess about what they're going to look like in their scheme. And Keanu Benton is one of those guys where there are just not that many teams that play like a Steelers 3-4 with a nose tackle. It's not necessarily the world's most popular defense right now. Wisconsin had it. They did it. They've seen him do it. And I think they only run with the nose about 30% of the time. He's not going to play a ton, but I do think he'll be a big help to Cam Hayward and Larry Ogunjobi. And they're starting him just at the nose, but they have bigger hopes than that for him. They think that he can be a guy that can play a 3-tech when they go into sub packages and spell those guys as well and be part of, like I was talking about, that second wave. He's also a guy that, man, I've never seen a guy, what do they list him at, like 315? He doesn't. He's built better than me. Like there's no heaviness to him. He's light on his feet. He doesn't look big. He's just a large, strong human. And I think he has some untapped athletic potential that they think they can really utilize long term. So I think, like, if you're looking at right now, he's going to be a nose tackle and maybe not much more than that. But I think going forward, they think that he's a guy that they can grow with and really, like you said, become part of the replacement plan for Cam Hayward. If you remember, Cam Hayward didn't start until his third season with the Steelers. So, I mean, this is not something that they're in a rush to do, but I think they see that down the road as something that they're working towards.
What about the depth on the line? And Leal was a third-round draft pick last year, got off to a rough rookie start, but are they confident that they have enough depth, quality depth?
Yeah, Leal is interesting because he's kind of like stuck in between. Like he plays a little bit on the edge. He plays some 5-tech in the base. He's a great guy to be like a rotational piece. I'm not sure they have an exact plan for obviously if you guys a 3rd-round pick, you hope he comes a starter someday. I'm not sure if they have picked a direction for him yet. Would it be on the edge? Would it be as a defensive end or as a tackle? I'm not sure they have an answer to that yet, but I think he's going to be pretty good at that role this year. He's a pain in the butt to play against. And I think if you're an offensive lineman that's gone to battle with Cam Hayward all game, and then the old guy taps his hand on the side of the head, and you got this young, big, athletic guy who's just a real pain in the rear end, like that's what he feels like. Oh man, I get rid of Hayward, now I got to deal with this. Like I just think that seems like exactly what they're going for with that defensive line. And then they've got some veteran guys. They brought in Braden Fehoko from the Chargers, Armin Watts from the Bears. Isaiah Loudermilk and Montravius Adams are both back. Were depth guys for them last year. So that's another spot where I think it's a tough cut to project right now. I think they have quality depth all the way down. Even like Manny Jones came over from the Cardinals, was on their roster last year. I'm not even sure he has like a chance. Like he's practice squad at best right now, but they're deep there for sure. And after Leal, I think most of those guys are mostly just guys. Big sort of. Fajoko's an elite space eater to me. He takes up double teams really well, but I think not big guys in terms of stat production.
Are they set in the kicking game?
At kicker, Chris Boswell did not have a great year, but they kind of only brought in token competition, so I assume that he's going to be the guy. They are full on having a competition at punter. They claimed Braden Mann off waiver from the Jets, and they have him up against Presley Harvin, who has been their starter for 2 years. If you look at their stats, it's like some guys have better this, some guys are better than that, but the full picture seems like they've been pretty even the last 2 years. So, I mean, very first practice here, they got a whole 10, 15-minute period of team punt to those two guys were going at it. So that's going to be a battle throughout training camp. Not sure how it's going to play out right now, but there's definitely some real competition there.
I tell you what, I'm going to pop up before I let you. I'm going to pop up the odds, some of these Vegas odds, and tell me what you think here. The Steelers right now are 50-1 to win the Super Bowl, and of course, the viewers can see all the other odds of how they would potentially exit if they don't win the Super Bowl, which is more than likely the case. But what they do have is they have them fourth of 4 teams to win the North, a little bit more than 4-1. Give me, if you had, and matter of fact, they even have the exact 4 if you had that prediction correct. So how would you predict the North right now? What do you think it's going to go 1 through 4?
Well, I think the Bengals are very clearly the best team. Obviously, if Joe Burrow's not healthy, that changes that. But I think they're very clearly the best team. Okay. After that, I think the Steelers are really undervalued compared to those other 2 teams. I don't know that they're really a lot worse off compared to the Ravens and the Browns. I mean, I think we're kind of in a fantasy land about Deshaun Watson. And just kind of everyone's just ignoring his extremely poor 2022 season like it didn't happen. Guys that are his age that miss multiple years don't necessarily come back the way they were. It's not a sure thing. And we have no idea what this new Ravens offense is going to be like.
That's
is
true.
It going to work? Is it not going to work? I like some of the moves they made to bring in some help in terms of skill position guys, but to me, it's a very uncertain thing. And so, I consider those 3 teams to me near equally. I don't think that one of them is way ahead of the others. The other thing is the Steelers play really well against the Ravens and the Browns. They generally do well against those teams. I think Lamar Jackson's 1-3 against the Steelers or something like that. It's not to me a big worry. So I think it's a deep division in terms those 3 all should be in the hunt for wild card consideration. In terms of the actual finish, I don't know. I think honestly, if you want to give me the best prediction I could give you, I think that Cincinnati will win and Pittsburgh and Baltimore will tie for second. I think they're so close that I cannot imagine those 4 teams all finishing separated by a game. Somewhere, someone's going to tie somewhere.
Yeah, that's true. Matter of fact, looking here at DraftKings, if it's Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Cleveland following Cincinnati. Those odds are 11-1. That's not bad.
I kind of like that. I think, I'm not sure the Steelers are going to win the division. I don't think they're better than the Bengals, but I think relative to those other 2, it's a pretty solid value.
And if you do it the other way, it's 9-1 with Baltimore in second, Pittsburgh in third. All right, now I'm going to ask you to make these predictions. So Pittsburgh Steelers specials, Deontay Johnson or Najee Harris, which one will have, or tell me if you think, if you have to predict which one is going to have 1,250 or more scrimmage yards, who would it be?
I think Najee Harris has been closer than that consistently, so I'll go with him. I think they're going to be more effective running the ball on a per carry basis, and so if they're able to do that, they should do that. I'm not sure. I do think Deontay Johnson will have a bigger role if the offense is more explosive in creating that. I just think there's more uncertainty in that prediction to me. I think Najee Harris has been very close to that number, and with a better offensive line should get there.
Freiermuth or Pickens, 1,000+ receiving yards?
I really like Pat Freiermuth as a receiver, but I think George Pickens is the guy just because of how unstoppable he is down the sideline and the ability to get those plays in big chunks. I'm not sure that either of them get there, but if I had to pick one, I'd take Pickens.
Okay. And do you think would you wager on Minkah Fitzpatrick accumulating 7 or more interceptions? And if he did, by the way, the odds on that are 16-1.
The fact that the line is at 7 just tells you all that you need to know about Minkah Fitzpatrick. I don't think I could bet on anybody getting 7 interceptions. But like,
yeah, for safety, that is hard. Yes, it is.
Like that's tough. I'll say this: I think he'll lead safeties in interceptions.
There you go. That's not bad.
I think I feel good about that prediction.
And the last one, over under 8.5 win total.
I think way over. I think I'm confused by, like, look, they won 9 games last year. They lost T.J. Watt for half a season. They got Kenny Pickett on his second year. Should show growth. They had a almost universally lauded offseason from Omar Khan, the general manager, in terms of free agency and the draft. And their schedule got significantly easier. And then how is the line lower? It doesn't make any sense to me. I think 9-8 to me feels like the floor. They were even like the big bad scaries that you think about when you're talking about win totals, where, like, what if TJ Watt gets hurt? Well, hey, look, they improved their depth at that position than they had last year. What if Kenny Pickett doesn't do well? Mitch Trubisky is back and was, a very playable quarterback last year, even if he wasn't what they wanted out of him. Like, that's a pretty solid
backup.
Do worse. I just don't see where the combination of things that has to happen for them to be that bad. It feels really far-fetched to me. I think, I'm not sure it's way over, but I think it's comfortably over in my opinion.
Alan, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for educating me on the Pittsburgh Steelers heading into the 2023 season. And I hope we get the opportunity to talk a couple times throughout the season as well. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Absolutely. Alan, appreciate it. Again, everybody can check out the links in the description area. We've got them for you if you want to follow Alan, either the website, Twitter, and so forth. So go ahead and do that. And we'll see everybody next time here on the OFN Today. Thanks, Alan.